Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Charmaine from CDM Handmade Crochet. I'm going to show you how I do the half double crochet foundation stitch today. This is going to be how we start the pattern that I'm going to show you in a later video. So first we start off by just forming a loop and making 2 chains. Okay, so then we go into the first chain, yarn over and into the first chain, pull through, and the first step that we do here is form the chain before we do the stitch. So here, pull through 1 loop only, yarn over, and do a half double crochet through all 3 loops. So you'll see you have the chain that you made and then your stitch. Let's go on to the next one. So this was your very first chain that you did all those stitches in, so we're going into the next one. So go into that stitch, pull through, yarn over, pull through 1 loop only to form your chain, yarn over, yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. Next stitch, yarn over, into, pull through 1 loop only to form your chain. That's your chain. Yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. So now you'll see that you're forming, this is your line of chains, and this is your line of half double crochets. It's doing it all in one step instead of doing an entire loop of chains and then an entire row of half double crochets. This makes a stretchier piece. Chains can be very tight, they don't have a lot of give, and when we're making some patterns we want to have a bit of give and a bit of stretch to it, and a foundation stitch has more stretch than a regular chained stitch. So I'm going to fast forward to the end to show you how I end this. Okay, now I have completed 64 of my foundation half double crochets, and so I'm going to do my 65th one. How long you make this headband depends on what the size of your head is. It's really very, very adjustable. You can make it small for a little person, or you can make it larger for somebody who has a big head or who has a lot of hair. So I'll make my last foundation half double crochet. So remember that this is the half double crochet stitch and this is the chain that you created. So you go into the chain, which is like going into the second chain, with your yarn over, pull through, make the chain by pulling through 1 loop, yarn over, and pulling through all 3 loops, forming the half double crochet. So now, because this is a headband, we're going to be working in the round from here on out. We need to actually join it. So this is the bottom, the chaining side. This is the top where your stitches are. So we're going to pull it around, and this is how I join it. Correct me if you have a different way, but this is how I do it. I put my hook into the original chain at the starting point. Get that tail out of the way. I do my slip stitch so that my pieces are joined, but if you notice, it's kind of cockeyed because I'm joining from the top of my stitch onto the bottom. So what I kind of do is then also just do a second stitch into a second stitch, and that kind of evens things out. When I'm all done, this tail will be used to join it more evenly. So it does kind of look a little bit funny in the beginning, but just so you're aware that that is on purpose, and the tail that you left in the original part will be used to join those together to make a more even seam. So we have the beginnings of our headband, 65 half double crochets made on a foundation, and from here we work in the round, and from here on out we work in the 3rd loop to create the knit appearance. So at the beginning of the round we'd chain 1, and yarn over, and then we kind of turn it a little bit to see the third loop. And so if you're looking at it here, this is your first stitch. That's your front loop and your back loop. And if you kind of turn it, that's your third loop right there. And that's the loop that we're going to be working in. Normally it's on the back and you can't see it, but that's where it is. So I was mistaken. That's not your first stitch. This is your first stitch, the one that we've already stitched into. So I'm looking back here. Oh, yes, it is. I'm so sorry. It's very hard to see when you're also filming. So we're going to go into our third loop, pull through all through 3 stitches because it's a half double crochet. On to the next stitch, front loop, back loop, third loop, yarn over, pull through, and through all 3. So you'll see that that kind of turns the stitch to its side. If you'll notice that. Instead of being on top, which is normally how it stays, it ends up kind of turning it to its side. And you'll see as we go along what that looks like. So I'll do a couple more stitches into the third loop and through. All right, I'll meet you back up at the end. Okay, so we've done the entire first complete half double crochet in the third loop round. I'm down to my last stitch here. So again, yarn over into the third loop, pull through, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. That was the final stitch in my round. So I'm going to slip stitch into the very first stitch of the round, and that's through the 2 normal loops to do the slip stitch. Okay, so there we have our completed round. Again, we're going to be using this tail to sew the ends together, and it will even it all out. So now I'd like you to complete 3 more rounds of half double crochet in the third loop to complete this half of the headband. Okay, so now you have completed the first half of the headband by joining 5 rounds all together and leaving a very long tail, which we will use later to connect the 2 halves. So then I went and made my second long strip of foundation half double crochet, which, as you've already seen, we join together. But this time, this is the important part, you need to join it like this. It needs to be looped inside the other half of the headband. All right, so stick your loop through, your hook through, slip stitch, and again, this is how I do it. Slip stitch into the top stitch, and you've got it joined. Now you proceed to go all the way around just like you did in the other half of the headband in the third loop of half double crochets all around, joining with a slip stitch each time, and then I'll show you how to sew it together at the end. Okay, we have completed both sides of our headband, and now we need to join them together for the interlocking crisscross. So what you want to do is align your 2 seams, and you'll notice that it creates a perfect little crisscross on the other side. So we're going to be sewing this line together. What I like to do is to make sure that my stitches face the same direction. It's just something I like to do to make sure it all looks uniform. It really doesn't matter. If you don't care about the stitches facing the same way, you can do it whichever way you like. I like to have them facing the same direction, so I will turn them that way. Okay, you don't necessarily need to have it perfectly lined up. As you start stitching, it will kind of align itself. If you're someone who is concerned about making sure everything lines up, it's very helpful to have stitch markers to kind of join each, every few stitches together, and then stitch along and remove them as you go. So I'm going to take my first long tail and I'm going to stitch it together. And we want to kind of stitch into that third loop again so that we can continue the knit look all the way across and it won't look like a seam. So the stitch I found the best that kind of does this is kind of, I believe it's called the mattress stitch. So if you can see, I'm going to find the third loop here. There it is. It's a bit challenging at first, of course, because you've got a very long tail to sew. And then just go back and forth between the sides, stitching into your third loop. I'll just quickly do a few so that you can see the effect in the end. Don't pull it too tight as you go because it will pucker if you pull it too tight. So you can see it's starting to form that knit look, and it kind of hides the seam a little bit because you're turning it, so it'll just look like it's done all the way across. What we do is we stitch to the about here, and then we repeat it on the other side. For this tail, it ends up on the wrong side. You can simply weave it through and use it to stitch that way. I'll show you at the end the finished product.